I'm Judy, 32, and my birthday party was supposed to be perfect. We'd just moved into our new house in Austin, a sprawling place with a backyard big enough for 50 guests. Soft lights hung above, music hummed low, and I felt on top of the world after years of grinding to build my tech startup. My husband had planned every detail from the catered tacos to the custom statue he gave me, a sleek glass figure symbolizing my success. Then my brother showed up late. He didn't say a word, just grabbed a champagne flute and stood in the corner staring. I should have known something was off. Right as I raised my glass to thank everyone, he moved. The champagne flew splashing across the dessert table, and he smashed that statue to the ground. Shards scattered everywhere. He looked me dead in the eye and screamed, "This is the price you pay for acting superior." The backyard went silent except for a kid's gasp. My dad rushed over, wrapped him in a hug, and said, "He just needs to let it out." My husband froze, guests stared, and I said nothing. Not because I was shocked, but because I knew words wouldn't fix this. That night, while everyone slept, I did something no one saw coming. By 8:30 the next morning, when he realized what I'd done, it was too late. What would you do if you were in my shoes? Share your thoughts and opinions in the comments below. Growing up in Austin, I was always the responsible one, the kid who got straight A's and worked summers to save for college. My brother, though, was different. He was the dreamer, always chasing some big idea but never following through. By the time I was 32, I'd built a tech startup from scratch, coding late nights and pitching to investors who doubted me. It wasn't luck. I worked tirelessly, skipping vacations, missing family dinners, all to make something of myself. Meanwhile, my brother drifted, hopping from one music gig to another, never holding a steady job. 3 years ago, he started asking for money. It began small, $100 here, 200 there. He'd call, voice full of charm, saying he needed studio time or new guitar strings. I gave in, thinking I was helping him chase his dreams. By last count, I'd lent him $15,000, money I'd scraped together from my own savings. He promised to pay me back once his music took off, but his promises were as empty as his bank account. He'd spend it on flashy clothes, late-night parties, or gear he never used. I'd see his Instagram posts, him posing with drinks at bars, not a care in the world, while I was drowning in spreadsheets to keep my company afloat. My husband saw it first. He'd sit me down and say, "You're not his bank." He was right, but I felt guilty. Our parents always leaned on me to look out for my brother, like it was my job to fix his messes. They'd call asking how he was doing, never once checking on me. Dad would say he's just finding his way, and Mom would nod along, her silence louder than words. I kept giving, hoping he'd grow up, but it was like pouring water into a cracked bucket. Last year, things got worse. My startup landed a big contract, and I was working around the clock to deliver. My brother, though, saw my success as his personal ATM. He'd text me late at night asking for cash to cover rent or buy new speakers. I started saying no, but he'd guilt-trip me, saying I was too busy for family. I'd lie awake wondering why I felt responsible for someone who didn't even try. My husband kept pushing me to set boundaries, but it was hard. Family's supposed to stick together, right? A month ago, it all came to a head. My brother called asking for $5,000 to buy a high-end guitar. He swore it'd be the thing to launch his career. I was done. I told him I couldn't keep bailing him out, that he needed to figure it out himself. His voice changed, sharp, bitter. "You think you're better than me, don't you?" he snapped. I didn't answer, just hung up. He didn't call back, but I could feel the tension building like a storm waiting to break. My parents didn't help. Dad sent a text saying I should be patient with my brother. Mom called, her voice soft but pointed, asking why I was being so hard on him. I didn't argue, I just said I was busy. Looking back, I should have seen the signs. My brother had always been jealous ever since we were kids. When I got into college, he'd roll his eyes and say I was showing off. When I started my company, he'd make snide comments about my fancy job. I thought he'd get over it, but that resentment was always there, simmering. My husband warned me he might lash out, but I didn't listen. I kept thinking family meant giving endlessly no matter the cost. I was wrong. The weeks before my birthday were quiet, too quiet. My brother stopped texting, stopped asking for money. I thought maybe he was finally taking responsibility. I let my guard down, planning the party with my husband, excited to celebrate in our new home. I didn't know he was waiting for the perfect moment to make me pay for saying no. That's when everything changed. The night of my birthday felt like it could have been perfect. My husband had spent weeks planning turning our Austin backyard into a warm, inviting space. Guests mingled, sipping drinks and laughing over plates of barbecue. I was in the middle of a conversation with a colleague when I noticed my brother across the yard. He'd shown up late as usual, wearing a faded band tee and jeans that looked like they hadn't been washed in weeks. He wasn't mingling, just leaning against a tree, his eyes darting around like he was sizing up the crowd. I tried to ignore the uneasy feeling in my gut. I'd hoped he'd at least act normal for one night. As the evening went on, he got weirder. He grabbed a soda from the cooler, popped it open, and chugged it in one go, slamming the can down hard enough to make heads turn. I caught my husband's eye, and he gave me a look that said, "What's his deal?" I shrugged, not wanting to make a scene. Then, during a lull in the music, my brother walked toward the gift table where a glass statue sat, a delicate piece my husband had picked to mark my startup's success. I thought he was just looking at it, but then he raised his arm. In one swift motion, he smashed it against the table's edge. The crash echoed and every guest froze. Shards of glass glittered on the grass. "You think you're so perfect, don't you?" he shouted, his voice cutting through the silence. He stepped closer, pointing at me. "Always acting like you're above everyone with your fancy house and your big shot company." My stomach twisted, not from shock, but from the weight of his words. He wasn't just angry, he was unraveling years of resentment in front of everyone. My husband moved fast, stepping between us. "Hey, calm down," he said, his voice steady but firm. He put a hand on my brother's shoulder, trying to guide him away. My brother shoved him off hard enough that a few guests gasped. "Don't touch me," he snapped. I could see my husband's jaw tighten, but he didn't push back. He glanced at me silently, asking what I wanted to do. I shook my head slightly, signaling to let it go for now. Then my dad stepped in. He walked over, calm as ever, and put his arms around my brother. "He's just upset," Dad said to the crowd, like it was no big deal. "He's been under a lot of pressure." My mom nodded from a few feet away, her face soft with concern for him, not me. I felt a sting in my chest watching them coddle him while I stood there surrounded by broken glass and stunned guests. Not one of them asked if I was okay. I could have screamed, could have called him out right there. But I didn't. I took a deep breath, forced a smile, and turned to the crowd. "Sorry about that," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Let's keep the party going." I nodded to my husband, who signaled the DJ to start the music again. People hesitated, but slowly conversations picked back up. I moved through the crowd, thanking guests, acting like nothing had happened. Inside, though, I was seething. My brother hadn't just ruined a moment, he'd humiliated me in my own home, and my parents had let him. As I poured myself a drink, I caught my brother's eye. He was sitting with Dad now, smirking like he'd won something. I didn't say a word, but I knew one thing for sure: this wasn't over. I wasn't going to let him walk away from this without consequences. After everyone left, I couldn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table in our Austin home, the house still smelling faintly of barbecue from the party. My husband was cleaning up stacking plates in the sink, but he stopped when he saw my face. "You okay?" he asked, his voice low. I didn't answer right away. I was done being the one who always let things slide. I opened my laptop and pulled up my bank account. For years, I'd been funneling money to my brother's so-called music career. $12,000 in the last year alone, wired to an account I'd set up for his studio fees and equipment. He hadn't recorded a single track that I knew of. I stared at the screen, my finger hovering over the transfer button. My husband sat beside me, not saying a word, but his presence steadied me. With a few clicks, I moved every cent of that 12 grand back to my savings. It felt like cutting a cord I'd been dragging for too long. Then I opened my email. Months ago, I'd connected my brother with a local record label, a small but respected outfit in Austin's music scene. I'd vouched for him, used my startup's reputation to get him a meeting. They'd offered him a contract to produce a demo, a chance most musicians would kill for. I drafted an email to the label's manager, someone I'd met at a networking event. "I'm sorry," I wrote, "but I can no longer recommend my brother for this project. He's not ready." I hit send, my heart pounding, but resolute. That contract was his lifeline, and I'd just pulled the plug. I closed my laptop and leaned back, the kitchen clock ticking past midnight. My husband reached for my hand. "You sure about this?" he asked. I nodded. "He crossed a line tonight," I said. "I'm done carrying him." We didn't talk much after that. We went to bed, but I lay awake wondering how my brother would react when he found out. I didn't have to wait long. By 8:30 the next morning, my phone buzzed with a string of texts. They were from him, each one angrier than the last. "You screwed me over," the first one read. "The label just emailed me. They're pulling the contract because of you. Fix this now." Another, "You can't do this to me. I need that money." I scrolled through the messages, his words sharp and desperate. He didn't mention the party, didn't apologize for humiliating me in front of everyone. It was all about him, like always. I set the phone down without replying. My husband was already up making coffee. He glanced at my screen and raised an eyebrow. "He's freaking out, isn't he?" he said. I nodded, sipping my coffee, the bitterness matching my mood. "Let him," I said. I wasn't going to engage, not this time. I'd spent years responding to his demands, his tantrums, his guilt trips. But that night, something had shifted. I wasn't just angry, I was free. I went about my day, heading to my startup's office downtown. The team was prepping for a big client pitch, and I threw myself into work, reviewing slides and tweaking code. My phone buzzed again, around noon, another text from my brother. "You're gonna regret this," it read. I didn't flinch. I'd made my choice, and I wasn't backing down. I locked my phone and focused on the meeting, pushing his words out of my mind. The days after my decision felt heavier than I expected. I was in my office reviewing code for a client deadline when my phone rang. It was my dad. I hesitated but picked up, bracing myself. "You need to help your brother," he said, his voice calm but firm, like he was stating a fact. "He's in a tough spot, and you pulling that money hurt him bad." I gripped the phone, my knuckles tight. I wanted to remind him how my brother had humiliated me at my own party, but I didn't. "He's got to figure it out himself," I said, keeping my tone even. Dad sighed long and heavy. "Family doesn't give up on each other," he said, before hanging up. I stared at the screen, his words echoing like a lecture I'd heard too many times. Later that afternoon, my mom texted, "We're family. We stick together. Please think about your brother." It was short, but the guilt trip was clear. I didn't reply. I'd spent years trying to please them, always being the one to fix things, but this time I wasn't budging. My husband noticed my mood when I got home. "They're at it again, aren't they?" he said, pouring me a glass of wine. I nodded, handing him my phone to read Mom's message. He shook his head. "They're enabling him," he said. "You did the right thing." His words grounded me, but I still felt the weight of their expectations. 2 days later, things escalated. I was at my startup's office downtown meeting with my team when my assistant buzzed me. "There's someone here to see you," she said, her voice uneasy. I walked to the lobby, and there was my brother pacing like a caged animal. His hair was a mess and his eyes were wild. "We need to talk," he said, stepping toward me. I didn't move. "Not here," I said, my voice cold. He raised his voice, drawing stares from employees. "You owe me. You can't just ruin my life and walk away." Before I could respond, my husband appeared. He'd been in a nearby meeting and had stopped by. He stepped in front of me, calm but firm. "You need to leave," he told my brother. When my brother didn't budge, my husband nodded to the security guard by the door. The guard approached, hand on his radio, and my brother backed off, muttering under his breath as he stormed out. I went back to my office, my heart racing but my resolve stronger. My husband stayed, checking in with me. "He's not going to stop," he said, his voice low. I nodded, knowing he was right. My brother had always pushed until he got what he wanted, and my parents' support only made him bolder. I tried to focus on work, but my mind kept drifting to what he might do next. That evening, I got a call from my friend Dale, a colleague at my startup who'd been at the party. "You need to see this," he said, his tone urgent. He sent me a link to a TikTok video. I opened it, and there was my brother sitting in his car ranting to the camera. "My sister thinks she's better than everyone," he said, his voice dripping with venom. "She cut me off, ruined my music career, all because she's jealous of me." He went on, painting himself as the victim, claiming I'd betrayed our family. The video had thousands of views, with comments piling up, some calling me heartless. My stomach churned, not because of the lies, but because he'd taken it public. Dale stayed on the line. "He's been posting stuff like this all day," he said. "I thought you should know." I thanked Dale and hung up my hands, shaking. My husband sat beside me as I showed him the video. "He's trying to turn this into a circus," he said, his jaw tight. I nodded, feeling a mix of anger and exhaustion. My parents' calls and texts, my brother's stunt at my office, and now this video. It was all a coordinated effort to pressure me. But I wasn't going to cave. The drama didn't end with my brother's office stunt. I was in a meeting at my startup going over financials when one of my employees, a young coder named Samra, approached me during a break. "Have you seen what's trending on TikTok?" she asked, her voice hesitant. I shook my head, confused. She pulled out her phone and showed me a video my brother had posted. He was standing outside a music studio holding a guitar, speaking directly to the camera. "My sister's trying to tear me down," he said, his tone a mix of defiance and charm. "She's got her fancy life, but I'm not giving up. I'm raising money for my next album support. An artist who won't quit." The video ended with a link to a crowdfunding page tagged with phrases like "family drama" and "rise above." It had 20,000 views, and comments poured in. "You're so strong, and don't let her win." I stared at the screen, my mind sharp and clear. He wasn't just playing the victim anymore. He was turning our fight into a brand. I went back to my office, the video looping in my head. My brother wasn't just attacking me. He was rallying strangers to fund his dreams, using my name as the villain. I didn't feel angry. I felt focused. I'd spent years letting him slide, but this was a new level of manipulation. I kept the video to myself for now, not even telling my husband. I needed to think, to plan my next step carefully. That afternoon, I met Dale for lunch at a diner near downtown Austin. He'd been keeping tabs on my brother's antics since the party. Over burgers, he leaned in, his voice low. "Your parents paid off $6,000 of his credit card debt," he said. "I found out from a friend who saw the bank transfer." "They didn't tell you, did they?" I set my fork down, the news hitting like a punch. $6,000. My parents had always bailed him out, but doing it behind my back felt like a deeper betrayal. "No," I said, my voice steady. "They didn't." Dale frowned. "They think he's the one who needs protecting," he said. I nodded, the pieces clicking into place. My parents saw me as the strong one, the one who didn't need help, so they kept pouring their support into him. When I got home, my husband was in the kitchen chopping vegetables for dinner. I told him about the debt, and his knife paused mid-cut. "They're enabling him again," he said, his voice tight with frustration. "They're never going to stop." I agreed, but I didn't want to dwell on it. I was done letting their choices control me. Instead, I focused on work, pushing my team to nail our next client pitch. But my brother's latest move kept nagging at me. He wasn't slowing down. He was doubling down. A few days later, I got a call from a contact in Austin's music scene, someone I'd met through my startup's networking events. "Your brother's been reaching out?" she said, her tone cautious. He's pitching to a bigger record label, one with connections in Nashville. Says he's got a story that'll sell records. I thanked her for the heads up, my mind racing. My brother was using his TikTok fame to pitch himself as a struggling artist with a dramatic backstory. He'd even mentioned his crowdfunding campaign, claiming it showed his fan base. I checked the crowdfunding page that night. It had raised a few $100s, not much, but enough to fuel his ego. My husband looked over my shoulder as I scrolled. "He's turning this into a circus," he said, shaking his head. I nodded, but I wasn't rattled. I was calculating. The real showdown was coming. It was a Sunday afternoon, and I was sorting through paperwork in the living room when the doorbell rang. My husband glanced at me, his brow furrowed. I opened the door to find my mom and dad standing there, their faces tight with purpose. "We need to talk," Dad said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. Mom followed, clutching her purse like a shield. I gestured to the couch, my stomach nodding, but I kept my expression neutral. My husband stood by the kitchen counter, arms crossed, watching silently. Dad didn't waste time. "You've gone too far," he said, his voice low but sharp. "Your brother's struggling, and you're making it worse. You need to forgive him. Help him get back on his feet." Mom nodded, her eyes soft but insistent. "He's your family," she said. "You can't just turn your back on him." I sat across from them, my hands folded, letting their words settle. I'd heard this before, but hearing it in person in my own home felt like a violation. They weren't here to understand, they were here to demand. My husband spoke before I could. "You're not being fair," he said, his voice steady but edged with frustration. "She's done nothing but support him for years, and he's thrown it back in her face. You saw what he did at the party. You know he's been dragging her name online." He stepped closer, his eyes locked on Dad. "Why is it always her job to fix him?" Mom flinched, but Dad's jaw tightened. "He's trying," Dad said. "He's made mistakes, but he's your brother." I could see my husband's hands clench, his patience fraying. "He's not trying," he shot back. "He's manipulating everyone, and you're letting him." I raised a hand, signaling my husband to pause. I looked at my parents, my voice calm but firm. "I'm done," I said. "I've given him money, time, connections, everything. He's used it to hurt me, to hurt us. I'm not paying for his life anymore." Mom's eyes widened. "You don't mean that," she said, her voice trembling. "You're his sister." I didn't waver. "I mean it," I said. "He's on his own." Dad leaned forward, his face red. "You're being selfish," he said. I didn't flinch. I'd carried their expectations for too long, and I was done bending. The room went quiet, the weight of my words sinking in. Mom started to speak, but I cut her off. "I love you both," I said, "but I'm not responsible for his choices. You can't keep asking me to be." My husband moved to my side, his hand on my shoulder, a silent show of support. My parents sat there stunned, but they didn't argue. They left shortly after, their silence louder than any words. A week later, I got a call from my contact in the music scene. "Your brother's deal fell through," she said. The new label passed on him. They didn't think he had the work ethic. I wasn't surprised. His crowdfunding campaign had fizzled out, barely hitting $1,000. I heard through Dale that my brother had taken a part-time job at a local coffee shop, bussing tables to make ends meet. I didn't feel triumph, just a strange sense of finality. He'd built his whole image on blaming me, but it hadn't gotten him anywhere. I sat with my husband that night, the house quiet around us. "You did what you had to," he said, his voice soft. I nodded, staring at the ceiling. I'd spent years trying to hold my family together, but I'd finally chosen myself. It didn't feel good, but it felt right. Life took a quieter turn. My husband and I stood in our nearly empty Austin home, surrounded by packed boxes, ready to move to a smaller house in the suburbs. The decision to leave our old place wasn't just about space, it was about starting fresh, away from the chaos that had defined the past few months. I walked through the rooms one last time, the walls bear the echoes of that disastrous party long gone. My husband squeezed my hand as we locked the door behind us. "This is the right move," he said, his voice steady. I nodded, feeling a weight lift even if just a little. We'd made another choice too, one that was harder but necessary. I stopped answering calls from my parents and blocked my brother's number. Their messages, once a constant buzz on my phone, had dwindled after our last confrontation. I didn't hate them, but I couldn't keep carrying their expectations. My husband supported me setting up call filters on our new landline to keep things peaceful. We didn't tell anyone our new address, not even Dale, though I trusted him. It wasn't about secrecy, it was about protecting our space, our sanity. I heard through a mutual acquaintance that my brother was still working at the coffee shop, wiping down tables and steaming milk for lattes. His music dreams hadn't panned out, and his crowdfunding page had stalled, forgotten by the internet. I didn't feel satisfaction or pity, just distance. He'd built his life on blaming others, and I wasn't going to be part of that cycle anymore. My parents hadn't reached out since they'd left our house, and I didn't expect them to. They'd chosen their side, and I'd chosen mine. As we settled into our new home, a cozy place with a backyard and cedar trees, I started to see things differently. I'd always thought family meant giving everything no matter the cost. Growing up, I'd been taught to put them first, to fix their problems, to keep the peace. But that belief had trapped me, draining my energy, my money, my peace. Standing up to my brother then, my parents showed me that family isn't an obligation without limits. It's a choice, one that should respect everyone involved. I'd spent years feeling guilty for wanting my own life, but now I saw it clearly. Setting boundaries wasn't selfish, it was survival. One evening, my husband and I sat on our new porch, sipping iced tea and watching the sunset. The air smelled of fresh grass, a far cry from the city noise we'd left behind. "We should take a trip," he said, his eyes bright with an idea. "Somewhere warm, just us." I smiled, the first real smile in weeks. "Hawaii," I said, picturing beaches and clear skies. We spent the night planning, pulling up photos of Maui, booking flights, and choosing a small resort by the ocean. It felt like a promise to ourselves, to the life we wanted. We laughed as we debated snorkeling versus hiking, the kind of light-hearted talk we hadn't had in months. The next morning, I woke up early, the house quiet except for the hum of the coffee maker. I stood in the kitchen looking out at the backyard and felt something new, calm. My startup was thriving, our new home was ours, and my husband and I were building something real. I didn't need my family's approval to feel whole. I'd learned that protecting my peace meant saying no even to the people I'd once thought I owed everything. My brother's choices were his own, and my parents' loyalty to him wasn't my burden to carry. I wasn't sure what the future held for us, but I knew one thing: I'd never again let someone else's chaos define my life. Setting boundaries had given me back my freedom, and I was ready to live it.
"You're just a freeloader pretending this house is yours." Vanessa's shrill voice carried from the foyer as she dragged her designer suitcase toward the front door. "Maybe when we get back, you'll have finally found your own place." My father nodded in agreement, not bothering to look me in the eye. "We've been more than generous letting you stay here rent-free. Most parents would have kicked their adult children out by now." I stood frozen in the kitchen doorway, my morning coffee cooling in my trembling hands. "This is my house," I said quietly. "Mom left it to me. You know that." Vanessa rolled her eyes dramatically. "Here we go again with that fantasy." "Tell her, Frank." My father's jaw tightened. "Your mother wanted us all to live here as a family, not for you to lord it over us like some princess. Legally, I'm still—" "Legally what, Dad?" I challenged, my voice stronger than I felt. He grabbed the handle of his suitcase. "We're going to miss our flight. Cassie's already waiting in the car." The door slammed behind them, leaving me alone in the echoing silence of the Victorian home my mother had lovingly restored before cancer took her 5 years ago. My name is Samra Wells, I'm 24 years old, and despite what my father and stepmother believe, I am the legal owner of this house in suburban Philadelphia. My mother made sure of that, placing the property in a trust with me as the beneficiary following her death. What I want is simple: respect for my mother's wishes and acknowledgement of my rightful ownership. Standing in my way are my father, who has conveniently forgotten the trust's terms, and Vanessa, my stepmother of 3 years, who treats me like an unwanted houseguest. I took a deep breath and walked to the large bay window, watching their car back down the driveway. My stepsister Cassie, 16, sat in the back seat, her face illuminated by her phone screen. They were headed to the Bahamas for 10 days, a family vacation from which I had been deliberately excluded. As their car disappeared around the corner, I felt a familiar mixture of hurt and anger rising in my chest. I had tolerated their dismissive behavior for years, telling myself it was what Mom would have wanted, for us to remain a family despite her absence. A notification pinged on my phone, an email from Vanessa to my father, accidentally copied to my address. "Frank, I've spoken with Harold. He says once we're back from vacation, we can move forward with having Samra legally removed from the house. He thinks her claim about Caroline's wishes won't hold up without the original trust documents." My stomach dropped. Who was Harold? And what did Vanessa mean about the original trust documents? With growing unease, I realized the situation was far worse than I had imagined. My mother, Caroline Wells, was a brilliant architectural historian who spent her career restoring historic homes in Philadelphia. This house, a Queen Anne Victorian built in 1887, had been her crowning achievement and greatest love. She purchased it as a crumbling foreclosure when I was just 7 years old, pouring her heart and savings into its restoration. My childhood memories are filled with the sounds of sanders and hammers, the smell of varnish and paint, and my mother's infectious excitement about uncovering original fixtures and woodwork. Dad never shared her passion. An accountant by trade, he tolerated what he called Caroline's expensive hobby, but complained constantly about the costs and disruption. Their marriage had been strained for years before Mom's diagnosis, but they stayed together, largely for my sake. When Mom learned her cancer was terminal, she made careful arrangements for the future. I was 19 then, a sophomore in college studying architectural preservation, following in her footsteps. Between chemotherapy sessions, she consulted with attorneys, set up the trust, and had long conversations with me about her wishes for the house. "This will be yours one day," she told me, her thin hand tracing the intricate balusters of the main staircase. "Your father can live here as long as he needs to, but the house belongs to you. Promise me you'll preserve it." I promised, of course. What I didn't anticipate was how quickly Dad would move on after her death. He met Vanessa at a work function barely a year after Mom's funeral. 6 months later, she and Cassie had moved into our home, bringing with them modern furniture that clashed with the Victorian aesthetic and an attitude that suggested they were doing me a favor by occupying my father's house. Initially, I tried to accommodate them. I was still finishing college, still grieving, and grateful for any semblance of family. Vanessa made occasional efforts at friendliness, though these moments always felt performative rather than genuine. Cassie remained distant, buried in her phone or sequestered in her room. Dad changed after they arrived. He began referring to Mom's carefully curated antiques as that old junk, and suggesting we modernize rooms that had been historically restored. When I objected, citing Mom's wishes, he would grow distant and cold. "Your mother is gone, Samra," he'd say. "The living need to come first now." I had graduated last year and found a job with a local preservation society, allowing me to stay in Philadelphia. I could have moved out, found my own apartment. Sometimes I asked myself why I stayed in a home where I was increasingly made to feel unwelcome. The answer was simple. This house was Mom's legacy to me, her final gift. Walking away felt like betraying her memory. So I endured the subtle digs, the exclusion, the gradual erosion of my place in what should have been my home. Now staring at Vanessa's accidentally forwarded email, I wondered if my patience had been a mistake. With my father and Vanessa now thousands of miles away, I decided to use their absence to search for answers. Who was Harold? And what did Vanessa mean about the trust documents? I started in my father's home office, a room that had once been my mother's library. The transformation was symbolic of the larger changes in our house. Her warm, book-lined retreat now a sterile workspace dominated by Vanessa's organizational system. I hesitated at the door, feeling like an intruder despite being the property's rightful owner. The desk drawers yielded nothing unusual. Office supplies, bills, a few family photos with me conspicuously absent. I turned my attention to the filing cabinet, methodically working through folders labeled with Vanessa's precise handwriting. In the back of the bottom drawer, I found a thick manila envelope labeled Wells House, Legal. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it, spreading the contents across the desk. Inside were copies of documents I recognized, the trust agreement my mother had established, naming me as beneficiary, and my father as a lifetime tenant with specific conditions. But there were also newer papers I'd never seen, correspondence with someone named Harold Brennan, a real estate attorney, discussing strategies to invalidate the outdated trust and establish clear ownership. A yellow sticky note in my father's handwriting read, "Original trust documents in Caroline's old lockbox? Sam might have key." Cold understanding washed over me. They were looking for the original trust documents, likely to destroy them. Without those papers, it would be my word against my father's about Mom's intentions. As I continued reading, the depth of the betrayal became clear. My father had been consulting with this attorney for months, seeking ways to claim the house outright. Vanessa was actively involved, suggesting they could argue that Mom had been mentally compromised when she established the trust due to her medication. The most recent letter from Harold outlined their strongest case, claiming that I had violated the trust conditions by interfering with Frank's quiet enjoyment of the property. A bizarre inversion of reality that made me the antagonist in my own home. I sat back, papers scattered around me, a strange numbness replacing my initial shock. My father wasn't just forgetting my ownership, he was actively plotting to take my inheritance, to erase my mother's final wishes. Almost mechanically, I gathered the documents and returned to my room. From the back of my closet, I retrieved a small fireproof box, my mother's final gift to me. Inside was the original trust agreement, exactly where she told me to keep it, along with a sealed envelope I'd never opened, marked in case of disputes. My hands shook as I broke the seal. Inside was a letter in my mother's handwriting and a business card for Eliza Montgomery, Trust Administrator. My darling Samra, if you're reading this, then Frank has forgotten his promises to me. I hoped he would honor my wishes, but I've prepared for the possibility that he might not. Eliza has the power to enforce the trust terms if necessary. The house is yours, sweet girl. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. All my love, Mom. I ran my fingers over her familiar handwriting, tears blurring my vision. Even from beyond the grave, she was protecting me, anticipating threats I couldn't have imagined coming from my own father. I should have been relieved to have this safeguard, but instead, I felt a profound sense of loss. Whatever remaining illusions I had about my father's character had been shattered completely. The parent I thought I knew, flawed but ultimately caring, was a fiction. Though I now had the means to protect my inheritance, I wasn't yet ready to use it. I needed time to process this betrayal, to decide how to move forward without destroying what little family I had left. I carefully returned everything to its hiding place, my mind racing with questions. How long had Dad been planning this? Was his relationship with Vanessa somehow connected to his designs on the house? And most painfully, had he ever truly accepted Mom's wishes, or had he been biding his time from the beginning? The next morning, I called the number on Eliza Montgomery's business card. After explaining who I was, I heard a warm, professional voice respond, "I've been wondering when I might hear from you, Samra." We arranged to meet that afternoon at her downtown office. Eliza turned out to be a no-nonsense woman in her 60s, with silver hair and piercing eyes that reminded me of my mother's. Caroline was very thorough in establishing this trust, she explained, reviewing the documents I'd brought. The conditions of your father's tenancy are quite specific. He may reside in the home rent-free for his lifetime, provided he acknowledges your ownership and doesn't interfere with your rights as beneficiary. He's been doing the opposite, I said, sharing the evidence I'd found. He's actively trying to invalidate the trust. Eliza's expression darkened. That would constitute a serious breach of the trust conditions. She studied the papers from my father's office. This attorney Brennan is taking an aggressive approach. Have there been other issues besides denying your ownership? I hesitated, then described the increasing hostility, the systematic exclusion, and the most recent incident before their vacation. I see, she made careful notes. Verbal abuse and creating an inhospitable environment for the beneficiary would also violate the terms. Your mother anticipated potential conflicts and built-in protections. What kind of protections? As trust administrator, I have the authority to enforce the conditions, up to and including terminating your father's right to occupy the property if he's in substantial breach. A mixture of relief and anxiety washed over me. Here was the solution, but at what cost? Evicting my own father seemed extreme, potentially destroying any chance of reconciliation. I don't necessarily want to kick him out, I admitted. I just want him to respect Mom's wishes and treat me with basic decency. Eliza nodded sympathetically. Let's start with a formal letter reminding him of the trust terms. Sometimes a legal reality check is enough to correct behavior. This approach seemed reasonable, firm, but not nuclear. Eliza drafted the letter while I waited, outlining my father's obligations under the trust and requesting a meeting upon his return to discuss ongoing compliance. This should be waiting for him when he gets back, she said, handing me the envelope. In the meantime, document any further communications or incidents. If he escalates rather than complies, we'll need evidence to take stronger action. I left feeling cautiously optimistic. The letter would serve as a wake-up call without permanently damaging our relationship. Perhaps once my father understood that his plans with Harold Brennan wouldn't succeed, he'd accept reality and we could rebuild some semblance of family harmony. That evening, my phone chimed with a text from Vanessa. We need to talk about your behavior while we're gone. Frank is very upset. Expect changes when we return. Attached was a photo of my father's office, the desk drawers partially open, papers not quite as I'd left them. They must have installed cameras before leaving, something I should have anticipated. My intrusion had been discovered. Shortly after, an email arrived from my father. I'm deeply disappointed in your breach of privacy. Searching through my personal documents shows exactly why you're not responsible enough for home ownership. We'll be consulting with our attorney immediately upon our return. I forwarded both messages to Eliza, my hands shaking. Her response was immediate. This changes our approach. Their aggressive stance suggests they won't respond reasonably to the letter. I recommend you allow me to exercise the trust's enforcement provisions now. In plain language, she was suggesting I authorize the eviction process, the nuclear option I'd hoped to avoid. Before I could reply, another email arrived, from Harold Brennan directly. Ms. Wells, I've been retained by Frank and Vanessa Wells regarding the disputed property at 1847 Chestnut Avenue. Please cease any communication with my clients and direct all future correspondence to my office. Be advised that we are preparing legal action regarding your unfounded claims to the property. My heart sank as I realized my cautious, measured approach had backfired. By giving them warning, I'd only accelerated their plans. The hope I'd felt earlier evaporated, replaced by the sickening certainty that this conflict was heading toward an irreparable break. Mom, I whispered to the empty room, what would you have me do now? The next morning, I called Eliza to discuss our options. Her advice was clear and firm. Samra, your father has engaged legal counsel who's already taking an aggressive stance. This suggests they intend to move quickly once they return. We need to respond with equal decisiveness. What exactly are you proposing? I asked, a knot forming in my stomach. I recommend we petition the court for an emergency enforcement of the trust provisions, including a restraining order preventing your father and his wife from re-entering the property pending a full hearing. A restraining order? Isn't that extreme? Not in this context. Their communications show clear intent to violate the trust and potentially remove you from your rightful home. The restraining order would simply maintain the status quo until a judge can review the full facts. I paced my bedroom, weighing her words. They're on vacation for 8 more days. Do we really need to act so quickly? The timing works to our advantage, Eliza explained. Filing now gives us time to secure the order before they return, preventing a potentially volatile confrontation. Remember, they don't know you've contacted me or that you have the original trust documents. Her logic was sound, but the emotional weight of the decision felt crushing. This wasn't just about property rights. It was about severing what remained of my family. Let me think about it, I said finally. After hanging up, I wandered through the silent house, running my fingers along the walnut banister my mother had lovingly restored, examining the stained glass window she'd commissioned to replace a broken original. Every corner held her memory, her vision of what this home should be. My contemplation was interrupted by another notification, a banking alert I'd set up after discovering their plans. To my shock, my father had remotely initiated a wire transfer from our shared household account, the account I primarily funded for utilities and upkeep, to Harold Brennan's law firm. He was using my own money to finance his legal attack against me. This final betrayal crystallized my decision. I called Eliza back immediately. "I'm ready to proceed," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "What do you need from me?" The next few days passed in a blur of legal activity. Eliza filed the emergency petition, gathered affidavits, and compiled evidence of my father's actions. My role was to document the home's condition, catalog my mother's restorations, and prepare a statement about the trust's creation. 3 days before my father and Vanessa were due to return, Eliza called with unexpected news. "The judge has granted our petition," she said, "but there's a complication. In reviewing your mother's original will and trust documents, we discovered something significant." "What kind of something?" "Your mother added a provision we weren't aware of. If your father remarried, the trust required him to either purchase your half of the property at market value or relocate within 1 year." I sat down, stunned. "He was supposed to buy me out after marrying Vanessa?" "Yes. The provision was triggered 3 years ago when he married Vanessa, but it appears he never disclosed this to the trust. Caroline wanted to ensure you wouldn't be forced to live with a stepmother who might not respect your position." The implications hit me all at once. So not only was he violating the terms by denying my ownership, but he's been in breach of the trust for 2 years by not buying me out or moving? Exactly. And there's more. Caroline left a sealed letter with my office to be opened if this specific provision was violated. My heart raced. "What does it say?" "I think you should read it yourself," Eliza said. "Can you come to my office this afternoon?" Hours later, I sat in Eliza's office, my mother's letter trembling in my hands. The familiar handwriting blurred through my tears as I read her final message to me. "My dearest Samra, if you're reading this, Frank has remarried and chosen to remain in our home without honoring the trust's terms. I wish I could say I'm surprised, but I've always known his attachment to the house was more about possession than appreciation. What Frank doesn't know, what I never told anyone, is that the funds for purchasing and restoring our home didn't come from my salary alone. They came primarily from my inheritance from my grandmother, with the specific condition that the property remain with blood descendants. Frank has no legal claim to the house beyond what I granted him in the trust, which he has now violated. I've instructed Eliza to help you claim what is fully and rightfully yours. The house is your legacy, your heritage, not just from me, but from generations of women in our family. Stand firm, my brave girl. You are stronger than you know. All my love, Mom." I looked up at Eliza, who had been quietly waiting while I absorbed this revelation. This changes everything, doesn't it? She nodded. Your father has no claim whatsoever on the property. None. Armed with this new information, Eliza and I revised our legal strategy. Rather than simply enforcing the trust conditions, we would pursue complete termination of my father's tenancy rights based on multiple breaches, denying my ownership, creating a hostile environment, attempting to invalidate the trust, failing to comply with the remarriage provision, and misusing household funds. The restraining order is now in place, Eliza explained as we finalized the paperwork. They won't be able to enter the property when they return. The sheriff will serve the formal eviction notice and will proceed with a court hearing for permanent resolution. I nodded, feeling oddly calm despite the enormity of what we were setting in motion. What kind of timeline are we looking at? The temporary order lasts 30 days. The hearing for permanent resolution is scheduled for the 3rd week, which gives your father time to secure new housing arrangements. As I drove home, I contemplated the practical aspects of this abrupt transition. Most of the furniture was my mother's, documented in the trust inventory, but my father and Vanessa had added their own pieces. Cassie had her own bedroom filled with personal belongings. I would need to make arrangements for them to collect their possessions under supervision. The unfairness of disrupting Cassie's life weighed on me. Despite our distant relationship, she was an innocent bystander in the adults' conflict. I decided to pack her things myself, carefully and respectfully, to minimize her distress. 2 days before their scheduled return, I received an unexpected call from a Philadelphia number I didn't recognize. Is this Samra Wells? A young female voice asked. Yes, who's calling? It's Cassie. Her voice sounded strained. I need to talk to you about something important. Surprised, I asked, Aren't you still in the Bahamas with your mom and my dad? I am, but I'm calling from the hotel phone. I don't want them to know. She paused. I heard them talking last night. They were fighting about the house and about you. My stomach tightened. What did they say? Frank said their lawyer thinks they can get the house if they claim you're mentally unstable or something. Mom suggested they could make it look like you're dangerous to be around. Cassie's voice dropped lower. They talked about planting something in your room when we get back. I don't know what exactly, but it sounded bad. The revelation stunned me. They were planning to fabricate evidence against me, potentially something to suggest I was dangerous or unbalanced. It was a desperate, despicable tactic. Thank you for telling me, Cassie. That was brave of you. It didn't seem right, and I heard other stuff too. About how the house is actually yours, not Frank's. Is that true? Yes, I said simply. My mother left it to me. There was a long silence. They never told me that. Mom always said it was Frank's house and you were just living there until you got your life together. Another pause. I'm sorry for how they've treated you. Her unexpected empathy brought tears to my eyes. It's not your fault, Cassie. I should go before they notice I'm gone, but I wanted you to know. After the call ended, I immediately contacted Eliza to relay this new information. This changes things, she said grimly. If they're planning to fabricate evidence, we need to take additional precautions. I'll contact the court about modifying the restraining order to prevent them from entering the property under any circumstances, even to collect belongings. We'll arrange for a court-appointed supervisor for that process. I agreed with her assessment, but a new worry had emerged. What about Cassie? She's just 16. She shouldn't be caught in the middle of this. We can request special provisions for her in the court order, Eliza suggested. Perhaps supervised visits or a neutral exchange location for her possessions. As we discussed these modifications, another call came in, this time from my father directly. Against my better judgment, I answered. Samra, he began, his voice falsely warm. We've been thinking about our conversation before we left. Vanessa and I want to apologize for our harsh words. We'd like to have a family meeting when we get back to discuss everyone's needs fairly. The sudden change in tone confirmed Cassie's warning. They were setting me up, trying to get me to lower my guard before their return. That sounds reasonable, I replied, matching his artificial warmth. We definitely have a lot to discuss. As soon as the call ended, I turned to Eliza. They're planning something specific for when they return. We need to be ready. She nodded grimly. Don't worry. We will be. The day of my father and Vanessa's return dawned clear and bright, a stark contrast to the storm about to break over our family. As instructed by Eliza, I had vacated the house temporarily, watching from across the street as the necessary parties assembled on the front lawn. The sheriff's deputy, Eliza, in her role as trust administrator, and a court representative to document the proceedings. Their taxi pulled up at precisely 2:15 p.m. I watched my father emerge first. His face relaxed from vacation until he spotted the official vehicles. Vanessa followed, designer sunglasses hiding her initial reaction. Cassie hung back slightly, catching my eye across the distance with a small, almost imperceptible nod. From my position, I couldn't hear the exact words exchanged, but the body language told the story clearly enough. The sheriff stepped forward, officially serving them with the court order. My father's posture stiffened in shock, his hand reaching for the documents. Vanessa ripped off her sunglasses, gesturing wildly as she presumably protested. Eliza remained calm, pointing occasionally to specific sections of the paperwork. The court representative took notes and photographs, maintaining an official record of the proceedings. As the reality of their situation became clear, my father's face transformed, first purpling with rage, then draining to ashen disbelief. Vanessa's reaction was more volatile, her arms flailing as she shouted at the officials, then turning accusingly toward my father. I had imagined this moment differently, perhaps with satisfaction or vindication. Instead, I felt a complex mixture of sadness and resolution. This wasn't a victory to celebrate, but a necessary ending to enable a new beginning. The final blow came when Eliza handed them the last document, my mother's letter explaining the true origin of the house funds and the generations-long female inheritance that preceded me. My father sank onto one of the suitcases, the facade of righteous indignation crumbling into stunned defeat as he finally understood the depth of his miscalculation. The house had never been his to claim. It had always, unequivocally, been mine. In the weeks following that decisive confrontation, the practical matters of separation proceeded with formal precision. My father and Vanessa secured an apartment across town, collecting their personal belongings under court supervision. Our communication was limited to terse emails regarding logistics, the warmth of family irreparably damaged by betrayal and legal intervention. The most surprising development came from Cassie. 2 days after the eviction, she contacted me requesting to meet at a local cafe. They've been fighting constantly, she confided over hot chocolate. Mom blames Frank for not telling her the truth about the house. Frank blames her for pushing him to take legal action. She hesitated. I was wondering if I could visit sometimes. The house, it feels more like home than anywhere we've lived. Her request touched me unexpectedly. Of course you can, Cassie. Anytime. She became a regular visitor, initially for weekend afternoons, eventually staying overnight in her old room when tensions at the apartment became unbearable. Despite our differences, we formed a tentative bond. 2 people collateral damage in the chaos of our parents' choices. My father attempted reconciliation once, arriving unannounced on a Sunday morning. I never meant for things to go this far, he offered awkwardly. After your mother died, I just couldn't accept that she hadn't trusted me with the house. It wasn't about trust, Dad, I replied. It was about legacy. Mom wanted to ensure the house remained in the family for generations. He nodded slowly. I understand that now. Too late, I suppose. Perhaps someday we would rebuild some version of relationship, but for now, the wounds were too fresh, the betrayal too profound. As for the house, I threw myself into continuing my mother's preservation work, focusing on the 3rd-floor renovation she had planned but never completed. Each restored molding and carefully chosen fixture honored her vision and strengthened my connection to the women who came before me. The house has always known who it belonged to, Eliza remarked during a visit. Your mother would be proud of how you've protected her legacy. She was right. This wasn't just about ownership. It was about honoring the past while building my future, exactly as my mother had intended.